What is the difference between a noob coder and a proficient coder? When I look back over the years of my software development career, I can see that I've grown a lot. I've also interacted with a lot of new programmers at my university when I was an undergraduate teaching fellow. As an undergraduate teaching fellow, I led discussion sections, I graded homework, projects, and exams, and I answered a plethora of email whenever they got stuck on their homework or projects. And then I also led some office hours. Whenever they got stuck, they could talk to me personally, and then I could work with them through their code. And recently I've been helping new programmers get better at programming by answering their questions whenever they get stuck on a project, or if they've done a project already and they want me to review their code, I've done that as well. And as I've grown in my software development career, I've worked with a lot of senior software developers. And as I interact with them, I get better at coding, and I can see what a proficient coder looks like, and I can see what noob coders look like. So what's the difference? In this video, I'll be going over how proficient developers develop their code, and how they debug their code, and how you can get better if you're a noob at coding. So let's get started. By the way, if you're in the early stages of your programming journey, I've got a special gift for you. It's called my 30-day beginner coding challenge. And it's a guide that will take you from no coding experience to building your first 4 projects. And the best part is it's free. It's a free gift to you. In this coding challenge, I guide you in 30 days to build 4 programming projects, and I give you some tutorials that are in C. But of course, these projects are really generic and really beginner friendly, and so you can actually code them in different programming languages. You can still benefit from this guide because you can just take the principles that are in my challenge and then apply them to your programming language. You can find the challenge in the link in the description, and if you download it and pay attention to what it says, you'll definitely learn some fundamental programming concepts that will give you a good foundation to your software development journey. The first difference I see between proficient coders and noob coders is that proficient coders have good coding practices. For example, proficient coders are really good at coming up with good names for their variables. A lot of times I get code reviews and then I see a noob coder's code, and then they use these weird names, and it's hard to understand what is this variable being used for. It is only when I look through their code and then look at the logic that I understand what the variable is. But if you had named it with a better name, then I would know what that variable is for. Another example is that proficient coders avoid using global variables. They would oftentimes declare variables only when it's needed. And a big reason they do this is because they don't want to use too much memory. They want to get rid of variables if they're not being used. Another example is code readability. Proficient coders will often make sure that their code is easy to read for other developers. Whenever I get code reviews from noob coders, I look at their code and it's just a mess. Everything is all over the place. There's spaces and tabs all over the place, and it's just hard to read. And a lot of times, I don't understand why, but they don't have really good indentation in their code. So it's really hard to know when an if statement begins and when it ends. And then they also have a bunch of comments all over the place, and they're not really consistent in their code. But proficient coders, they make sure that things are cleaned up. Proficient coders also use version control. And it's not enough just to know how to use version control. There are also some good standard practices for version control as well. For example, with a git commit message, you don't want it to be some really long git commit message. You want to make sure it's short, concise, and you want to make sure that a commit only has certain amount of changes. You don't want to have a bunch of changes for different features, different bug fixes all in one commit. So the big lesson here is just because your code works, that doesn't mean it's done. Oftentimes I review code and the code works, but there's a lot of bad practices that are being used. And I learned a lot about coding practices when I had code reviews at my previous job. In my previous job, we had a lot of code reviews, and a more senior developer would look at my code, and my code would work, but then he would point out things that I did that were inefficient and things that I did that may introduce some bugs into the code later on. So how do you develop good coding practices? Obviously, it comes through experience, but I would say it also comes by working with other people. If you work with other people, they will point out issues with your code, or if you look at their code, then you can see that how they went about it, and you can assess which is a better way to go about doing something. When I was a new software developer, I often looked online for example code, and it's by observing these example codes that I was able to see what are some good coding practices. And as I was looking for example code, I would often stumble upon different forums that talked about good and bad coding practices. So growing your software development IQ is like picking up any other skill. Like in basketball, if you want to grow your basketball IQ, you have to study other basketball players, and then you have to watch a lot of film and also work with other basketball players. Play in a team and work with them as well. Alright, the second way that proficient coders are different than noob coders is that they develop their code incrementally, step by step. I will always remember this story that my professor gave us when he gave us our final project. He told us a story about how one of his students just stayed in class one day and he coded the whole entire project in class in one sitting, in one afternoon. And after he coded all of the requirements for the project, and then he compiled it and then he ran it, of course, it didn't work because he didn't test anything as he was going along. So if you're working on a program, you really want to break it down into different features and work on each feature independently. Work on one feature first, and then if that feature is really complex, break that feature down into different subtasks. For example, say you have one module of your code that's sending a message to another module of your code. You want to test out the message construction first. You'll probably use a library to create that message, and you may not be familiar with that library, so you need to get familiarized with that library and create a message first, construct the message first. Make sure that's working. And when that's working, try sending it to the other module. But you want to test the simplest message first. You want to make sure you have a simple message working. Once you have the message sent working, then work on the receiving aspect and try to see in the other module if you can receive the message correctly. So you want to have some confidence that you can send one simple message to the receiving module, and then you can start adding more fields to that simple message to make it more complex until you have everything that you need for that message that you need to send from that one module to the other. And eventually, as you get better at programming, you can start coding more complex tasks, and then you can do it right the first time, and you'll be surprised when you get it right away. So the third way that proficient coders are different is that they know how to segment the code to diagnose an issue. When we have a bug in our company, our software development team knows how to come up with guesses on what's probably causing the issue. They can narrow down this part of the code is probably okay, and then this part of the code might be a candidate for where the issue is happening, and then they can identify which parts of the code could be causing the issue. If the bug is really hard to find, we like to use process of elimination, and we would do some tests and then we would rule out that this part of the code is probably okay and then this part of the code is probably okay, and then we're left with less candidates for where the issue could be happening. So how do you segment the code so that you can narrow down where the bug is if you're not familiar with the code? If there's a debugger, I would recommend using that, because then you can use the debugger to step through the code, and then you can see if the program ever goes to a certain part of the code. If the program never goes to that part of the code, then that code probably isn't the culprit. And as you're stepping through the code, you can look at the variable value, and if it's something different than what you expect, then you can start going down that path and see why that variable is not the value you expect. Debuggers are really key, because if you have a big program, your program will probably have a variety of different paths that the program can go through, and the debugger will tell you which one it's going through when the issue is happening. And if you don't have a debugger, you can also use print statements or log statements, and then you can put a log statement in different paths, and then you can see where if the program goes through this path, for example, then you'll have a certain printout for that path. And in the logs or print statements, you can include the variable values there. And if you see a value for a variable that you don't expect, then you can go down that path and narrow down where the issue is happening. Alright, those are the three main ways that proficient coders are different than noob coders. The first one is that they have good coding practices. The second one is that they develop their code incrementally. And then the third one is that they know how to segment their code when they're doing their debugging. So which one of these three do you need to get better at coding? I love to hear your thoughts, and I want to hear your next steps to get better at coding, to go from being a noob coder to a proficient coder. Alright, like I mentioned earlier, if you're just starting off in your programming journey and you don't know where to start, you can download my 30-day beginner coding challenge. And it's a 30-day guide where I teach you how to build those 4 beginner programming projects. It's really beginner friendly, and I go step by step on how to build each one, and I go through the tutorials that you need to build each one. So download that in the link in the description. Alright, that's it for this week's video. I hope it really helped you out. If you have any questions, feel free to let me know in the comments, and I'll be sure to answer you there. And if you have any other ideas or questions, also leave a comment and I'll try to answer you there as well, or make a new video to help answer your question. And I'll see you in the next one. Peace.